The judge's eyes narrow as he looks down at the black woman standing in front of him. His voice cuts through the silence of the courtroom. "Why are you even here?" he sneers, clearly making a judgment based solely on her race. The room tenses. Everyone can feel the weight of his words. The judge's biased tone is unmistakable, but instead of shrinking or backing down, the black mother stands tall. Her eyes don't waver, her shoulders are squared, and she speaks unwavering. "I'm here because I have every right to be here," she replies calmly, her voice steady but firm. The judge, surprised by her composed response, tries to press further, thinking she'll be intimidated. "You're wasting my time. You don't belong in this court." But the woman doesn't flinch. Instead, she steps forward, her voice growing louder, cutting through the room. "I belong here just like anyone else. Your hate doesn't scare me," she says. The judge, taken aback, stumbles for words. His attempted insult falls flat as the room goes still. The people around her watch, waiting for her next move. Her courage has shaken the very foundation of the courtroom. The judge doesn't know what to say, and in that silence, the black mother's response has already made its mark. "Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below." The judge slams the gavel down with a force that echoes in the courtroom. "Enough of this nonsense," he yells, glaring at the black mother who had just made a powerful statement. "You think you can speak to me like that? You're in my courtroom, and I make the rules here." Her face remains calm, but the fire in her eyes is undeniable. The judge expects her to cower, to beg for mercy, but she doesn't. "I have as much right to be here as anyone else," she responds firmly, her voice unwavering. "You do not intimidate me, and I will not be silenced." The courtroom falls quiet, every eye on her, waiting to see what will happen next. The judge's expression darkens. "You want to test me, do you?" He sneers. "You will regret this." But the mother doesn't back down. She steps forward and speaks louder this time. "I will not be afraid to stand up for what is right. Not today. Not ever." The judge's face twists into an expression of disbelief, trying to process her response. He has never been spoken to like this in his courtroom before. He takes a moment to compose himself, but it's clear that he's losing control of the situation. Around him, the courtroom is tense. The black mother's calm yet defiant demeanor is challenging everything the judge thought he could get away with. She's standing up, not just for herself, but for all the people he has mistreated over the years. The judge continues to glare at her. He tries to come up with a clever retort, but his words falter. For the first time in his career, he's unsure how to proceed. The mother is still standing, not intimidated, not afraid. She looks at him, eyes piercing through the silence. "You are not in control here. The truth is," she says, "you may wear the robe, but your actions today show the true character of who you are." The entire room falls into a deep silence. The judge's grip on the gavel tightens, but he says nothing. It's clear that he's lost the battle, and the power of her words has overwhelmed him. The white judge, sitting at the front of the courtroom, casts a condescending glance toward the black mother standing before him. His lips curl into a smug smile as he leans forward, ready to deliver a comment that will sting, and one that will echo through the courtroom. "You people just don't know when to stay in your place." The judge sneers, his voice dripping with disdain. The words fall from his mouth like poison, and the courtroom, once filled with murmurs and soft discussions, goes deathly silent. The mother, caught in the crossfire of his racist tirade, blinks, trying to process what had just been said. Her mind races for a moment. She doesn't know if she heard him correctly, but the expression on the judge's face, smug, dismissive, tells her that it wasn't a mistake. The room, too, seems frozen in shock. Her heart beats faster, a sudden rush of adrenaline flooding her system as she realizes the weight of what's just happened. She's in a courtroom, a place meant to uphold justice, yet she's just been degraded by the very person who is supposed to administer it. For a brief moment, the Black Mother stands there, silent and still. She's taken aback by the audacity, her body tense with the sting of the insult. The judge's words keep replaying in her head. You people. She wants to speak, to defend herself, to fight back, but the weight of the moment holds her in place. The room is thick with anticipation. Everyone, from the defense to the prosecution, is waiting for her to react. The air is heavy with uncertainty. Will she speak up? Will she stay silent? Or will she take the judge's insult and leave the courtroom, defeated by his bigotry? The silence stretches longer. Her breath is steady now, the initial shock of his words fading. She feels the eyes of the courtroom on her, watching, waiting for her response. What she does next will define her strength, her dignity, and the legacy she leaves in this room. It's as if time has slowed. Every second feels like an eternity. She could feel the heat of the stare from every corner of the room. The prosecutor, the defense, the spectators, all eyes are locked on her. The judge watches with a smirk, his eyes full of superiority, almost daring her to speak back, as if he believes she won't have the courage to challenge him. But then, slowly, she gathers her composure. She straightens her posture, locks eyes with the judge, and takes a deep breath. The tension in the air is palpable. The courtroom is on edge, unsure of how she will react. It's a pivotal moment. What will happen next? The Black Mother's choice will decide whether justice will truly prevail in this moment, or if the status quo will continue. Her hands tremble slightly, but her voice remains calm and steady. She takes the power back in her words. I know exactly when to speak, Your Honor, but this time it's you who needs to listen. And just like that, the room breathes again. The audience sits back in awe, unsure of how the judge will respond to this challenge. The insult was a spark, but her response has already set the stage for something much bigger. The courtroom is no longer just a space for legal proceedings. It has transformed into a battleground for dignity and justice. As she stands her ground, her words echo in the silence, and a shift begins to take place. Her presence commands respect, and her courage inspires those in the room who have long been silent. This moment, this single exchange, has become a defining moment for the Black Mother. She hasn't just responded to an insult. She has claimed her voice, her agency, and her right to be treated with dignity. Her defiance may have stunned the judge, but it's the rest of the courtroom that has taken notice. The audience feels the weight of what just happened, knowing that the tides of power have shifted in this courtroom. Everyone in the room knows that this case, this moment, has just transcended the simple matter at hand. The Black Mother is no longer just defending her position. She is challenging the very system that seeks to keep her, and those like her, silenced. The silence that once filled the room is now charged with anticipation. The judge's smirk fades, his eyes betraying the slightest hint of unease. It's clear that this woman, standing before him, is a force to be reckoned with. The atmosphere is thick with tension as the courtroom waits for the next move. What will the judge do now? Will he back down, acknowledging her courage and the injustice he has just displayed? Or will he attempt to regain control and silence her once more? The courtroom holds its breath, knowing that the response of both the judge and the mother will shape the course of this case, and perhaps even the future of justice itself. The courtroom was thick with tension after the mother's powerful words. The judge, stunned by her challenge, was momentarily silent. The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how the confrontation would unfold. The Black Mother stood tall, her eyes locked on the judge with unwavering determination. Her voice had pierced through the courtroom, cutting through the air like a sharp blade, and now, every second felt like an eternity. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, his posture shifting slightly. He clearly hadn't expected this level of defiance from the mother. His earlier smugness faltered, and for a brief moment, the arrogance that had defined him seemed to slip away. He couldn't help but glance nervously around the room, aware that his control over the situation was slipping. The room fell quiet once again. The black mother could feel the eyes of the entire courtroom on her. The weight of the moment hung heavily in the air. Everyone was waiting, expecting her next move. Was this it? Was this where the story would end, with her standing her ground and leaving the courtroom in silence, a victory for her dignity and courage? But no, this was only the beginning. The black mother, still calm and composed, looked directly at Judge Thompson and took a deep breath. Her gaze never wavered, and her expression remained resolute. Her voice, when it came, was steady, but there was a new fire in it, one that had been ignited by the injustice she had just endured. "I've had enough," she said, her words measured and deliberate. "You will not belittle me or my people. You will not make assumptions based on the color of my skin. I have worked hard to be here, just like everyone else in this courtroom, and I will not be treated as less than anyone else." Her words were not just a challenge, they were a declaration that she would no longer allow herself to be reduced to a stereotype or dismissed because of her race. She had faced racism before, but this time, it was different. She wasn't just defending herself. She was standing up for all those who had been silenced by a system that favored one group over another. The tension in the room was palpable. You could feel the shift, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Judge Thompson's face twisted in disbelief as he tried to regain control of the situation. He opened his mouth to say something, but the mother's words had already taken hold of the room. The audience, who had once been passive observers, were now fully engaged, leaning forward in their seats, hanging on every word. But then, something happened that no one could have predicted. The mother, who had been calm until now, shifted her posture slightly and took a step forward. She wasn't done yet. "I've fought my whole life to get here," she continued, her voice strong and unwavering, "and I won't let anyone take that from me, especially not someone like you." The air in the room grew heavier as the judge's expression shifted from disbelief to something darker. His eyes narrowed, his fingers tapping nervously on the bench. He was rattled, but he wasn't ready to back down. The audience waited, unsure of how far the judge would go to silence the mother. And then, just as it seemed like the judge might attempt to retaliate, something incredible happened. The mother's words resonated with someone in the audience, a figure in the back of the courtroom. Someone who had been watching silently up until now stood up. It was the mother's daughter, a young girl who had been sitting in the front row, quiet and composed, while her mother faced the judge's cruelty. The daughter, with an air of confidence beyond her years, walked to the front of the courtroom and stood next to her mother. She looked directly at Judge Thompson, her gaze unwavering, and the room fell silent. "My mother is right," the young girl said, her voice ringing through the room. "You have no right to speak to her like that. You have no right to speak to anyone like that. We are all human beings, no matter our race. You can't just treat people however you want because you think you're in charge." The words from the young girl hit everyone like a lightning bolt. Her courage in the face of injustice was undeniable, and her voice, clear and unshaken, reverberated through the room. The judge, for the first time in this encounter, looked unsure. His posture slumped slightly as he realized that the young girl's words were as powerful as her mother's. In that moment, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted once more. The tension that had built up began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of unity and defiance. The black mother and her daughter had not only taken control of the situation, but they had turned the tables on the judge. His arrogance had met its match in the strength of two voices determined to be heard. The judge, now visibly uncomfortable, glanced at his colleagues, his earlier confidence completely gone. His usual authority seemed to evaporate in the face of the truth and strength that the black mother and her daughter had just demonstrated. The audience, once a passive group, now buzzed with the energy of support and admiration. It was clear that what had started as an injustice was now transforming into something far more powerful. The black mother, standing tall with her daughter by her side, knew that the battle was far from over, but she also knew that this moment would not be forgotten. This was more than just a fight for herself. It was a fight for everyone who had been marginalized, for everyone who had faced racism and discrimination in a system built to silence them. As the courtroom held its breath, the black mother and her daughter stood resolute. The fight for justice was no longer just a matter of words. It had become a battle for the very soul of the courtroom, and the mother and daughter had just begun to take control. The moment the black mother and daughter's defiance went viral, public outrage spread like wildfire. The judge's racist comments were no longer a secret. They became a symbol of everything wrong with the justice system. News outlets and social media platforms amplified the story, with people rallying to support the mother and daughter, sharing their own stories of discrimination and mistreatment. Protests erupted in multiple cities, demanding justice for the black mother and her daughter, who had dared to stand up to a racist judge. Their courage sparked a broader conversation on systemic racism, with people from all walks of life coming together to denounce the bias that had been allowed to thrive for far too long. Meanwhile, Judge Thompson faced severe backlash. Once considered a figure of authority, he now found himself under intense scrutiny. His colleagues distanced themselves from him, and legal organizations began questioning his fitness to serve as a judge. It wasn't just a few people who disapproved. It was a movement that was challenging everything he represented. Desperate to salvage his reputation, Judge Thompson issued a public statement, claiming his comments had been misinterpreted. But the public wasn't buying it. The viral videos were clear, and people were furious that he tried to downplay his actions. His once secure position was now hanging by a thread. As the investigation into the judge's behavior deepened, more examples of his bias emerged. The public demanded accountability, not just for the judge's comments, but for the system that allowed him to continue unchecked for so long. The black mother and daughter had ignited a revolution, a call for justice and equality that couldn't be ignored. The public's support for them only grew, and Judge Thompson's career and reputation quickly crumbled under the weight of their defiance. Their bravery had shown that change was possible, and the fight for justice had only just begun. As the story of the black mother and daughter's brave stand against the racist judge continued to spread, something remarkable began to happen. The public outrage turned into a powerful movement for change. People were not just protesting. They were pushing for accountability, for reforms in the judicial system, and for a society where racial bias would no longer be tolerated. The black mother and daughter's strength had inspired countless others to speak out about their own experiences with racism. Their defiance became a beacon of hope for those who felt silenced for too long. They didn't just stand up for themselves, they stood up for everyone who had ever been discriminated against, for every voice that had been ignored or suppressed. Meanwhile, the judicial system began to take notice. The investigation into Judge Thompson's actions continued, with increasing pressure for him to be held accountable. The public's demand for justice didn't waver, and as the pressure mounted, Judge Thompson's ability to deny his racist comments became more difficult to defend. His attempts to downplay the incident only fueled the fire, and soon his career came to a crashing halt. In a groundbreaking move, Judge Thompson was officially suspended from his duties, and a full investigation into his conduct was launched. The ruling was a direct result of the public's refusal to allow such behavior to go unchecked. It was a victory for the black mother and daughter, but more importantly, it was a victory for everyone who believed in fairness, equality, and justice. As the investigation continued, more stories came forward about Judge Thompson's past cases, where racial prejudice had influenced his decisions. The deeper the investigation went, the clearer it became that his bias was not just an isolated incident, it was part of a larger, systemic issue that needed to be addressed. This investigation served as a wake-up call for the entire judicial system, signaling that change was no longer optional, but necessary. For the black mother and daughter, their fight wasn't over. They had not only brought attention to one man's racism, but also to a larger societal problem that demanded attention. They continued to advocate for reform, for equality, and for a future where no one would be treated unjustly because of their race. Their message was clear. Standing up for what's right, no matter the consequences, could lead to real change. They had shown the world that individuals could challenge systems of power, and that with courage, their voices could be heard. The public's response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from all over the world, thanking the black mother and daughter for their bravery and inspiring others to continue fighting for justice. Their story became a catalyst for change, one that reverberated far beyond the courtroom. Ultimately, their fight didn't just result in the downfall of one racist judge. It sparked a larger conversation about the need for reform in the judicial system, a conversation that showed no sign of stopping. The black mother and daughter had ignited a fire that couldn't be extinguished, and their legacy would inspire generations to come. The story of the brave black mother and daughter had come full circle. From the moment they stood up to the racist judge in that courtroom, their lives had been forever changed. What began as a simple act of defiance had sparked a revolution, one that challenged the very system they had once trusted. As the judge's career crumbled and the public continued to call for justice, the black mother and daughter remained resolute. They had fought not just for themselves, but for everyone who had ever been wronged by a biased system. Their victory was not just personal, it was a triumph for all those who had been oppressed, ignored, and silenced for far too long. In the weeks following the investigation, the black mother and daughter took on an even larger role in the movement for justice. They spoke at rallies, shared their story with the media, and became vocal advocates for change. Their bravery had inspired countless others to come forward with their own stories of racial prejudice and discrimination, leading to a ripple effect of awareness and action. The call for reform in the judicial system had never been louder. People demanded changes to ensure that no one, regardless of their race, would ever again face such injustice. The mother and daughter had proven that it was possible to make a difference, to challenge the system, and to demand fairness. However, the road ahead wasn't without its challenges. The fight for justice is never easy, and despite the overwhelming public support, there were still those who fought to preserve the status quo. Some tried to downplay the significance of the incident, while others continued to deny the existence of systemic racism in the judicial system. But the black mother and daughter refused to back down. They understood that true change requires perseverance, and that their struggle was not just for them, but for future generations. They knew that the impact of their actions would be felt far beyond their own lives. Their courage would inspire countless others to stand up against injustice, to raise their voices when they see something wrong, and to never be afraid to fight for what is right. As they continued to advocate for systemic change, they found strength in knowing that their story had already made a difference. The road ahead was long, but they were more determined than ever to continue pushing for a better, more just world. In the end, their story was a reminder to all of us. Courage, integrity, and the willingness to fight for justice can change the world. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. When you stand up against oppression, when you speak the truth, you can make an impact. The black mother and daughter had proven that. Their legacy would live on, inspiring future generations to never accept injustice and to always stand firm in the face of adversity. As the story of their struggle spread, so did the message of hope and change. They had shown the world that one voice, one action, could make all the difference. The mother and daughter, who had taken a stand in the face of injustice, now stood at a crossroads. The events in the courtroom, the emotional journey, and the tidal wave of public support had brought them to a new chapter in their lives. Their fight was not just about one encounter with a racist judge, but about redefining what justice truly meant in a world marred by bias. The aftermath of their victory was bittersweet. Although they had succeeded in exposing the flaws in the system and had gained widespread recognition, the experience had left deep scars. The emotional toll was heavy, and the public eye, while empowering in many ways, also felt suffocating. Still, they pressed on. The courtroom incident had stirred up discussions on a national scale, forcing people to confront the hard truths of racial discrimination. People began asking themselves, what could they do to ensure something like this never happened again? How could society heal from such deep-rooted inequalities? For the mother, the fight was personal. She knew that what she had done was not just for herself or for her daughter, but for everyone who had been wronged by the system. It was a message to every person who had suffered under the weight of prejudice that their voices mattered, and that they too had the power to demand change. But she also knew that real change takes time. While the world had heard her story, she understood that the battle was far from over. One courtroom victory, no matter how powerful, wasn't enough to tear down the centuries of injustice that had shaped society. The public's support was heartening, but she realized that the work to change the system had only just begun. Through all of this, her daughter remained by her side. The young girl, who had bravely spoken out in the courtroom, had now become a symbol of hope for countless young people everywhere. She had proven that courage knows no age, that standing up for what is right is not reserved for adults, and that every voice, no matter how young, has the potential to create ripples of change. The mother and daughter were now determined to make a difference in ways they had never imagined before. They decided to take their story to communities across the country, speaking directly to those who felt voiceless. They wanted to empower the next generation to carry the torch for justice, to continue the fight, and to ensure that no one would ever again feel the sting of discrimination in the same way. But even as they traveled and spoke, they encountered resistance. Some people, particularly those entrenched in their privilege, dismissed their cause. They tried to belittle the movement, claiming that racism was no longer a significant issue. But the mother and daughter were undeterred. They knew the truth. They knew that the fight was far from over, and that the lessons they had learned needed to be shared with everyone. Their journey took them to schools, community centers, and even government buildings where they spoke about the importance of recognizing bias and standing up to it. The mother shared her personal story, the pain she had felt, and the strength she had discovered within herself. Her daughter, now a beacon of hope for others, spoke passionately about the power of unity and the importance of taking action when faced with injustice. Together, they challenged people to look beyond their own experiences and understand the struggles of others. They reminded everyone that every voice mattered, that silence in the face of injustice only perpetuated the problem, and that standing up for others was just as important as standing up for oneself. As their message spread, so did the movement for change. More and more people joined the cause, not out of obligation, but out of a shared desire to create a better world for their children, for their communities, and for future generations. The mother and daughter had ignited a spark, one that had the potential to burn away the old, broken system and replace it with a new era of justice, equality, and compassion. But their work wasn't without its challenges. There were setbacks along the way, moments when they felt like giving up. There were times when their progress seemed slow and the resistance felt insurmountable. But they knew that they had to keep going. Their story had inspired too many people for them to turn back now. They had already seen the impact they had made, and they knew they couldn't stop until the work was complete. For the mother, the journey had been one of transformation. She had learned that fighting for justice required patience, persistence, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. She had also learned that standing up for what's right is not always easy, but it is always worth it. Her daughter, too, had grown into a powerful voice for change. The girl who had once been quiet and reserved was now a confident advocate for justice, ready to lead her generation into a brighter future. Their journey was just beginning, and they knew that there would always be obstacles in their path. But with each step they took, they became more determined to create a world where justice prevailed, where people of all races could walk side by side, and where the words "equal rights for all" were not just an ideal, but a reality. And so, they continued their mission, knowing that every conversation, every protest, and every speech brought them one step closer to the world they dreamed of. Their story wasn't just a victory over one racist judge. It was a victory for humanity. It was a victory for every person who had ever been discriminated against, and for those who would continue the fight for generations to come. Their message was clear. The fight for justice is long, but it is never impossible. When people come together and fight for what is right, change is not only possible, it's inevitable.